Hello, this is Isabel Litzler, Director of Pléiade HC, presenting to you today Succeed in Your Job Search in Switzerland. I hope that during this tutorial you get a lot of very informative, very good information so that you can really get the job that you want. So, a few words about myself. My career is mainly in human resources. I started in my 20s working in HR in California. I always worked for multinational organizations or large-size organizations when I was in LA, but also in Paris and in Switzerland, in Geneva. My latest organization where I work was Gavi Alliance, a not-for-profit type of organization. So I'm very happy to share my expertise or my understanding of different company cultures with my clients. I think this is one of the value that I bring, is that I can really help people understand different company cultures and whether they're right for them. And more recently, in 2015, I started my own service type of organization called Pléiade HC. So the HC stands for Human Capital, which in my view is really the foundation of any organization. It's really the talent that works in the company. And I'm also a member of Fédération des Entreprises Suisses Romandes. So this is a federation for companies in Switzerland. So the content of this tutorial is really to give you some tips on the culture, but also how you go about applying. And I want to spend a few minutes on the Frontalier Status, because I think this is going to be quite important if you're doing the working in one country and living in another one. There will be some complexities there. So starting with this beautiful photo of Geneva at night to give you some inspiration on your job search. I wanted to basically share with you on this slide, not to go about exactly the details of how Switzerland was formed, etc. But I want you to get the understanding that really Switzerland is a country that functions in total, in my view, a federation where the members have a true vote in the country. So there's regular votations you will soon see in Switzerland. People give their opinions and they're called to give their opinions on different initiatives all the time. So this is quite important in the culture, is this exchange between the different involved parties and always being called upon to make decisions. So quite a participative type of country. Today you have a president elected, Simonetta Sommaruga, in 2015. Then you may be listening to this tutorial in 2016. So it will change, but just to give you again this idea of a rotation in terms of power and shared within the different members. I'll let you read the different figures and information on languages, but just to give you the main element here is really the importance of German. And I think if you're not quite familiar with Switzerland yet, probably you think that English is sufficient if you target an international organization. And unfortunately, it's not the case. If you're going to work for the UN, for example, you will need many languages just to be hired. And if you're targeting the private sector, even though it's an American company, for example, they still will require some basic local language. So it could be French, German, Italian, based on where you target. But again, for the purpose of this tutorial, my information is mainly around the French-speaking part of Switzerland. So you will need French, and probably German is more and more required because you work with Zurich or German entities of the organization. So the main principles I want you to understand is really the fact that Switzerland is not part of the EU. People tend to forget because it's close, but it's not part of the EU. So there are some notions of work permit that you need to have. Also at the border, you will be checked regularly. You need to remember the taxation, especially if you are going to have a business and you have to charge added tax, etc. There's some cultural and linguistic differences based on where you live. And finally, the notion of territory is going to be important. So you don't have the same behaviors and cultures if you're in Geneva than if you're even 40 kilometers away in Canton Vaud, for example. But the main thing, again, is to keep punctuality, make sure that you're on time, especially if you go to interviews, and keep a low profile. So just to give a little tip on a low profile, coming from English-speaking countries, the culture is really to show what you can do, but really to be assertive to some extent. In Switzerland, it doesn't mean it's not the case, but you have to do it in a more low-profile way. So the Swiss don't like necessarily people who are too proud or too sure of themselves. So you have to keep that in mind, and it's something I do also when I do the interviewing skills masterclass and training people how to present their skills. It's really an art. It's how you present yourself in a way where you know what you do and you can deliver, but you're not being too pushy or aggressive. So the main two things that you will need looking for work in Switzerland is really language skills. So the more languages you know, the better, and the sooner you'll be hired. And you will need to deal with work permits. So I don't want to make a full tutorial on work permit in this particular tutorial. And it's really very much an individual situation based on which country you're from and what you plan on doing. And I have some tips for people who want to start a business, for example. There's some solutions around that. But things have changed in the last couple of years. There has been a votation in Switzerland to actually limit immigration. So now you can see in the job advert it has changed. It used to be that just being of EU nationality was enough to be hired. Now more and more you already need a permit, a valid work permit to be hired. Also with the Frontalier situation I will discuss in a minute, with the changes of health insurance, now companies have more work that they need to do, and therefore it becomes less of a motivation for them to hire you. So on the Swiss market, I just wanted to give you very light figures because you can find them on the secoadmin.ch. Of course, it's in French, but at least it gives you some idea. You can find a lot of information also in German, German in French probably, but this is basically for people who want more. But again, the goal of this tutorial is to give you some highlights. And the main highlight is to understand that the national unemployment rate is quite low compared to other countries, meaning there's quite a dynamic economy where you can find work. And also it's very much in the industry, in the services sector that you have most jobs. So if you're in these two sectors, you have probably less opportunities, but if you're in services, this is a country that has some valid potential for you. And a few things around employment situations. So no minimum wage in Switzerland. You have to log in on average 41 hours. It could be more, especially if you have responsibilities. And I would strongly encourage also to read the Swiss Code of Obligations, because you will find a lot of information on the being employed in Switzerland and what it's about. It's quite different from other countries. There's rules, etc. So I would definitely recommend that you find some information there. So under the services sector, which is the main one in Switzerland, I again want to focus more in Geneva because this is where I have most of my clients and this is where most people are looking, also Zurich. You have a lot of work in the associations type of area, so social work, I would call it. You also have a lot of work around services to companies, commerce, banking, schools. You have a lot of leading schools in Switzerland in general. And I'm thinking about hospitality. I'm thinking about schools such as IMD or EPFL that are worldly known. Tourism, public administration. Again, the international organizations is quite a dynamic sector here in Geneva. And also the luxury/watch sector is quite dynamic. So if you're looking for work in the watch sector, you can probably find also some opportunities. So this is just a headshot that shows you where you have the international companies, which I'm guessing if you're listening to this tutorial, you're from abroad, you might target multinationals. So here you can see with basically the type of trade that you're in, where you could target in Geneva and in Vaud, again in the French-speaking part of Switzerland. You have quite a few organizations here. I see this slide is already a few years old. Yahoo is no longer in Canton Vaud, but you have a lot of other ones that you can target still. And the source here is the American Chamber BCG. So job search techniques, very important for you is to have basically a checklist that you can follow when you're going to apply for work. So the first thing is really to see if there's a market for you. I think too many people come to Switzerland and say, this is what I do, and now I'm looking for work. I think you should do it the other way around. Is there a market, and then adjust your skills or your profile. I said it in a minute ago, but do you have a work permit issue? If you're already saying, I don't have a work permit, I'm coming from abroad, this is something that you need to deal with. Then once you have these two covered, it's really about more into the nitty-gritty of the resume writing and have some very good quality documents in terms of resume and cover letter. Then you will need to start building a diversified strategy on job search. This is something I help with my clients. It's really building on a strategy, not just sending resumes every day, but how do you go about other things to really build on your job search. So one of them is really to develop your network, and for most job seekers I've met, this is where they fall short. Either they have no network or it's very limited, and this is going to be a huge booster to the timing in terms of job search, how fast you find something. Be honest in your application. It's very, very typical that in Switzerland, everything is checked. So they really do a background check. They look at the companies you worked for, and you will need to produce documents saying you work there. So no need to rely on that. Then you need to ask yourself the question, where do I add value? This is something you need to ask when you start building your resume and your cover letter. Too many people just have a list of things, but they haven't thought through this question, and this is something I help with as well. And in your mindset, you need to start thinking that you're a service provider and not a job seeker. So you're bringing value, you're bringing a service to an organization, and you're not just seeking a job. So now to talk really more in detail about what a Swiss resume should contain, the first thing is really your personal details. And this will shock probably most people, because in most countries it's not something that you should put on the resume, and it's actually legal. Things such as your marital status, your birth date. Actually, in Switzerland, it's not mandatory, but it's a huge plus. So if people know these details about you, it's actually better for your application, because it goes with this aspect of transparency, honesty, and the values in Switzerland of knowing you. So they want to know as much as possible. If you're a known entity, it's more reassuring for them, as if you're someone they don't know. So if you put a photo, if you have your details, the recruiter will feel more secure about you. So again, a photo is something I would strongly encourage. Again, everything I mentioned here is not something I can convince people to do if they don't feel comfortable, but I'm just giving you the tips to get a phone call from a recruiter sooner than faster. You need a title header, so you need to actually state what you're looking for. You also need to be concrete on the skills that you have, but please don't put a list of everything you've done since you started working. It's not going to help you. It's really picking the main skills that you have. In Switzerland, the training and diplomas will be important to mention actually what you have in terms of training, and be translated. If you're going to present information, it needs to be understood by the local person. And then you get into the professional experiences. So now, how do you apply when you see a job advert? Typically, what most organizations want is your Swiss style resume I just mentioned here, a letter of motivation, your work certificates or work statements, and the copies of your diploma. So again, I can cover this more in details when I work one-to-one with individuals, but your work certificates is something very specific you get in Switzerland. So if you have no Swiss experience, you probably don't have it. You just have a work statement, which is, okay, I've worked there for this many years, and this is what I did at this rate of salary, or not even putting salary. And then copies of your diploma will be very important. Certified copies, or copies that people can look at and feel comfortable that they're true. Recommendation letters from previous employers. This is going to be a huge difference, especially if you're new and you don't have those work certificates that most employers are using to assess the honesty of your profile and your qualifications. So you can go back to your employers and ask for recommendation letters. This will also help your credibility on the market. Now, I wanted to make a quick slide on Swiss salaries, because I think a lot of people ask me, what should I put as salary? How do I deal with the whole salary issue? This is something that I can help you with as well, the salary issue in Switzerland. I give you basically 2 websites you can go to. The first one is this one, the pay scale, which I found very detailed actually. It gives you really what you could claim potentially. The Glassdoor is also a good website, because it's people putting in the information and you can find where you stand. And also sometimes consulting firms will put some salary data on research that was done, and you can find that by just typing salary information Switzerland, and it's just again some web research. You can find very much everything. So the frontalier status is something I also wanted to cover because you may be in that situation where you live in a country and work in another one. And I've seen that also with people working in Switzerland and living very far away, and they were only coming back the weekends. So I found this quite the case, especially with not-for-profit, where you have specialists that are coming from all over the world and keep their family in one country and actually work in Switzerland. But it's something to keep in mind because, again, using my human resources experience, it can get very complicated and it's not sometimes necessarily the best way. So the first one for all is the work permit situation. Your work permit differs if you're frontalier than if you live in Switzerland, and it's actually, I would say, a less secure work permit because when you live in Switzerland, you get a B permit typically. If you go to the other side of the border, it's a frontalier permit, which is usually a bit less permanent and can change. So I would call it really a weaker permit. In terms of tax situation, of course, you have tax issues. I'll get to that in a minute. Same with health. You also have to deal with family support for children, how much you get, if it's worth, living on the other side of the border. And there's retirement issues as well. In Switzerland, they have 3 types of levels of retirement. But the main one you have to remember is just the mandatory one, the AVS it's called. And finally, unemployment insurance. This can also differ in terms of amount and length that you will get unemployment for. Again, if you're living in another country that's Switzerland, it might be less money and shorter time. But the 2 slides I wanted to focus on is really health insurance because there has been a lot of changes lately. You basically used to get a private insurance when you were frontalier, and it was usually a very cheap price, monthly price. And now you went from the option of having the Swiss, which has always been there, and the private option, to having the Swiss and the social security in France. And as you see, the policies can be quite high. So if you pick the Swiss private health insurance, I would say per individual, it probably would start at 300. And that's with someone relatively young with no background, health problems, etc. And I put to 600 depending on, again, your personal situation. This is per person. So if you have to cover wife, children, etc., it can be quite costly. With the social security here, it's based on your salary. So they take a percentage of your base salary and then they decide 6% is right now. In 2016, the big discussion is to make it 8%. So it can be also quite an amount. So it's some calculations to do as well if you're going to be frontalier. Same thing with the tax issues based on the canton where you live. And I mentioned at the beginning the importance of the canton. Your tax can really vary. In some cantons, you pay very little tax, and in other ones, it's huge. So I would really, again, if you get a job offer, this is probably something you should look at. Where do I want to live to reduce my tax? And is this job offer as good as it sounds? I mean, coming from another country, obviously the Swiss salaries will probably be higher than what you saw before, but you have to take into account where do I live, how much is my tax going to be, especially if there's children, a wife who works or a husband, etc. So I let you look at the details around here, but the 2 things to remember is basically if you live in the canton that I've listed here, it's a French tax return. If you live in Geneva, for example, it's a Swiss tax return. But you need to produce a declaration that you live in France. So now I wanted to also present the services that I offer because this tutorial is basically part of a bigger series. And the series is basically geared to help you find a job and really be successful in your career. So I have 3 types of services. I do private consultations on demand. There's this program called Online Job Seekers Pack for Managers, and this is where this tutorial is actually an extract. So here you have 20 online tutorials with templates, customized meetings, and everything. And then I have training programs. So it's just usually a 1-day masterclass. So if you pick here the Online Job Seekers Pack for Managers, And you will have tutorials just as this one. You have 20. This is 500 francs, and it includes also 2 customized meetings with myself. So in the customized meetings, we really focus on your issues. So I mentioned a few here in this tutorial you may have, but it could be other ones. It's really based on what you need, and it can be in French or in English for the private consultations. Now the tutorials are all in English, and they will also give you templates, 16 templates, and you have everything, CV pre-edited, so you just have to push the button basically. So this saves you a lot of time in your job search. The tutorial also have unlimited access from anywhere, so you can do this while at home. You can really, you control when you want to listen to them, at which rate, etc., etc. So I wanted to offer this to you because I think it's really complementary to what you've learned on this free tutorial, and it gives you all the different aspects that you need to have to be successful in your job search. And I call that branding your profile, going to market, and then securing the job offer. That's my method, and you're welcome to look at the details on my website by clicking right here. Again, I wanted to thank you very much for listening to this tutorial. I hope you found it helpful, and don't hesitate to send me an email via the website or just to give me your feedback. I'd be happy to hear it. I'm always happy to hear feedback from people who are listening to my tutorials. Thank you very much.